This is Chapter 4, Part 1, the PowerPoint that's in your Moodle site. And I want to walk with you through this to help hopefully explain it a little clearer for you. The guidelines that we are going to look at in Chapter 4 are very important. It is a requirement of the HIPAA regulations that we use the ICD-10 CM for diagnostic coding, and all facilities and all providers use these codes for diagnostic coding. Procedure coding will make a difference between between inpatient and outpatient facilities, but for diagnostic coding, everybody uses these same codes. But there are some guidelines that are specific to inpatient versus outpatient, and some that are general to all settings and all providers. And when you go and sit for your coding certification test, and I hope that is the intent of everybody taking these classes, I just want to make you aware that this is about a $400 test by the time you pay for the membership and pay for the test. And I believe you get one retake for that. It is a 6-hour test, and I believe it has about 300 questions on it. When you come in, you will have your ICD-10 manual, your pencil, and your test, and your knowledge, and that is it. So you have to know how to use this coding manual to successfully pass the coding certification test. So as I mentioned, it's about $400. You will be spending a year, basically, if you take your procedure coding class in the fall and then follow up with the certification prep class next spring. You will be finished with these coding courses by the end of next May. So you're looking at taking your certification exam, and it's a national certification test in sometime next summer. So if you put away $35 a month for the next year, you will have that money to set for it. You don't want to come up at the end and not have the funds to sit for your test, and then it's months before you're able to sit for that. Once you pass your certification test, you would be considered an apprentice, a coding apprentice, and for you guys that looked at the AAPC assignment, you would have seen that the apprentice status for the certification test, you either have to have 2 years of work experience or a combination of 80 hours of coursework, which you will get through Van Scramble, and 1 year of work experience to remove that apprentice status. It is a process to go through to become a certified coder, but I believe it's well worth that effort. But I want you to know this information up front so that you can prepare for it. I do encourage you to look at your learning outcomes to know what it is that you're trying to get out of the specific chapter. So please do read through those, and at the end go back and look and see if I know this information. Am I able to understand or articulate this information? So with our guidelines, we have general guidelines, section 1, that apply to both inpatient and outpatient settings. In here we're going to concentrate on outpatient coding, but because our procedure coding class is specific to outpatient coding, so we're going to concentrate on that. But I want you to be aware of the inpatient requirements and their guidelines as well. So guidelines section 1 is going to apply to inpatient and outpatient. 2 and 3 are going to be specific to inpatient, and then 4 will be outpatient. So in here we're concentrating on sections 1 and 4 of your guidelines. Your guidelines, while they're in your textbooks, they're also in your coding manual. As I mentioned, when you go sit for this certification test, all you will have is your manual. So you have to know where this information is. So take the time, even if you're reading it out of your textbook as you're looking up codes and using your manual there, know this information is in your manual. Your guidelines are in the front of your manual along with other resources. Know they're there. Utilize them. So your guidelines are created by CMS, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, and NCHS, the National Center for Health Statistics. And again, these are for all settings and all providers, and they are in the front of your manual. And key, as we get started, is the guideline that you must use both your index. We talked about how the coding manual is laid out in Chapter 3. You must use both your index and your tabular list to correctly code. You cannot code from just your index. So you must always verify your codes in the tabular list. And we also must code to the highest level of specificity. This means being as specific as possible. So we talked about in 3 that our ICD-10 CM codes are 3 to 7 characters long, and you must use the most number of characters that are available. If there's only a code with 3 characters, you use that. There's a few of those, but it's not many. But if there's a 4th, 5th, 6th, or 7th digit, you must make that distinguishment between the codes and use the most extensive number of codes that is available, coding to the highest level of specificity. We're also going to look in here about interval conditions to a disease. We're going to look at multiple and combination codes when we use those. We're going to look at acute versus chronic coding and sequela. And we'll talk about that when we get to that point. So here we use the index, the alphabetic index. This is where you start your coding process. So if you're looking up the condition asthma, you're going to look in the A's. If you're looking up boils, you're going to look in the B's. Cataracts, the C's, all the way down to zygomycosis in the Z's. So that's your alphabetic index. Now remember, your index does include your table of neoplasms, your table of drugs and chemicals, and the index to your external causes. All this was from Chapter 3. Once you get a code from your index, you're going to go to the tabular list. That's the last half of your book where it lists all the codes. Remember, all of your ICD-10 CM codes are alphanumeric, and they all start with a letter. So you're going to look up that code and verify that information, which means you read all of the includes, excludes, notes, and everything that go with that. And you're going to use your instructional notations, such as see or see also, or includes or excludes. All that information you have to read to be able to code correctly. In the index, you will often see codes with a dash behind it, and that indicates to you that additional characters are required, and you get those from the tabular. However, you cannot trust that the index is always going to tell you. Sometimes a 7th character is not indicated with the dash, but it is required. So always, always, always verify your codes in your tabular list. Okay, so they ask you to take a look at these codes and kind of break them down. And if you look at that according to what's in your book, the first 3 characters are your category. E10, S52, and T15 are your category. Your 4th through 7th digits are alphanumeric. The first digit is always alpha, so it's always starting with a letter. Your 2nd character is always numeric, so a letter, a number, and the rest of them could be a combination of letters or numbers. There's always a decimal between the 3rd and the 4th character, If you only have a 3-digit number, you don't put the decimal. Sometimes, like in this last example, there is a X, which, and you'll note it's a lowercase character. It indicates a placeholder. So for future expansion, we do require a 7th digit, the D. The D means something specifically, but we don't have a 6th digit, so we use that placeholder of an X. Sometimes you will see multiple X's, so if you don't have a 4th, 5th, or 6th character, you could have up to 3 X's there, but it does require a 7th digit. So that's the placeholder. Okay, so again, remember that guideline of coding to the highest level of specificity. If it requires that 7th digit, you've got to use 7 digits and use those placeholders. Okay, you can't say, I don't know whether this is, you know, the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th digit. I can't distinguish between those different codes. If you don't have that information, you have to query the provider and find it out. You cannot use a lower level code and code correctly. All right, so if you're running this as a PowerPoint show, you will actually not see these answers until you answer it. So they ask us to look at this code and see what's wrong with it. We can see we do not have a first character of a letter, so that's incorrect. And also your decimal should be between your 3rd and 4th character, not your 2nd and 3rd. All right, so you'll see here we choose codes for our conditions, problems, issues. Remember, our diagnostic codes are for why we're seeing the patient, okay? Not for what we're doing for them, but why we're seeing them. This supplements our procedure codes, which we will take in the next class in the fall. But we provide medical necessity for the procedures and services that we do. And in here we're looking specifically for coding for reimbursement purposes. So we attach a dollar figure to our procedure codes. That's what we get paid for. But we have to also tell the insurance company why we did this procedure and service to get reimbursement. So we have to provide medical necessity through a diagnostic code that matches with that procedure or service. So our valid codes for this is A00.0 through T88.9, and then we skip over to Z00 through Z99.8. Okay. So there are no U codes in here, and that allows for some future expansion as necessary. However, there are V, W, X, and Y codes, but these are not first listed codes. These will always be secondary codes. These are external cause codes. They always supplement your primary code. So we talked about in Chapter 3 the first listed diagnosis for outpatient coding, and then we have the term principal diagnosis for inpatient coding. So what happened for this accident or injury is recorded with V through Y codes, but they're always secondary codes. And then Z is going to be factors that influence the health status and contact with health services. So take a look at your Z codes. Go to your Z section, read through some of those main terms to see what that all means. So these could either be secondary codes or primary codes. Okay, so think about maybe something like an annual checkup. So you're not going because you have a condition, a problem, or issue. You're going for your regular annual checkup. So that is one of the Z codes. But again, these could be supplemental, secondary codes, or primary codes. Your V through Y codes are always secondary codes. All right, so for coding for signs and symptoms, and then we're going to get to integral conditions as well. So signs and symptoms. Signs are the things that the doctor can validate on an exam. Symptoms are what the the patient experiences, but you really can't see it maybe.